Hey guys, Mike from Shimino's Workshop. We have a Korbanth AS2 installed with Proffieboard, NeoPixel support or setup. This particular hilt has just the core Proffie fonts. It doesn't have any custom fonts. Blue blade style. Removable Goth chassis. So let's fire it up first. I don't have a blade plug in there. Don't have a suitable blade plug for this hilt just yet. So we'll demonstrate it. Let me see. Am I zoomed in? Yeah. We'll demonstrate it with a NeoPixel blade instead. So here, what's nice about this, I can zoom in up here. We have the AS2 doesn't come with this style of control box. These are LEDs. These are 5mm LEDs who've been sanded down and gutted and converted into, plunger mechanisms or actuators, so that you push the button, right? Power here, auxiliary here. That's actuating a plunger, which is pushing down on a button that's on the chassis, and it's spring-loaded, so it pops back up into place. So pretty excited about that, being able to get this to work. LEDs, red and green, cosmetic. They're not hooked up only because, I don't know if we can see in here, but where I put my finger in, the blade has to insert here. And the way that the Goth chassis was designed, it essentially stops here. So when we put a NeoPixel blade or blade plug, it is passing by these LEDs, and there's just no room behind the LEDs to light them up. They probably will shine through though. Actually, I didn't even consider that, but when we turn the blade on, we'll probably see some light shine through, just from the blade itself, or a blade plug was in here. But the LEDs themselves are, or these are not LEDs themselves. Okay, so with that said, we can turn it on. There is a 28mm bass speaker in here. Probably need to play with or adjust the clash threshold, because as you can see, the clash sounds like the clash is tripping other clashes. So we'll play with the threshold setting, and because when I take the chassis out, you'll see the Proffieboard is pretty close to the speaker. So we have blade retention here, and then we have a cover tech, which is also being used to keep the chassis in place. I'm going to put a blade in, and I don't think I have the right sized. Let's see, which one is it? Okay, just going to tighten it a little bit. Doesn't need to be. So the nice thing about that, real long blade depth here, right? That's nice and secure. Activate. I know this doesn't show well, but 1-inch blade, 1-inch blade socket.
Smooth Jedi.
I won't, as I said before, I'm not going to, it is just the core fonts that are on here for right now. And I'm not going to demonstrate all the core fonts as part of this video. Just wanted to demonstrate the hilt itself, and the chassis, how to remove it, how to insert it, kill key, things of that nature. This is Proffieboard 1.5 with OS 2.4, so it's the latest version of ProffieOS. I did make one modification, thanks to one of the community forks. a long press on the auxiliary. I'm going to be putting this in all of my installs going forward because I love this mod. But long press on the auxiliary.
4.06 volts.
4.06 volts. It'll read out the battery voltage to you. That's a great feature. I'm hoping that gets merged into the main fork at some point. Okay, so let's get to the chassis. Chassis is removable through the pommel, and let me put the right socket in. So we're gonna take the cover tech off. Again, I'm using the screw of the cover tech, which comes really long. The screw for the cover tech is too long and needs to be sanded, otherwise the chassis won't fit in. So we shorten it just a little bit so that it just grabs the chassis just enough to hold it in place. This particular chassis just slides right out. If it doesn't slide because maybe it got stuck in there, you know, you can do a little palm slap just to knock it out. I did enhance the Goth chassis a little bit. The chassis comes essentially in 4 pieces. You have your main chassis, which supports 2 buttons. Here I'm just using 2.5 mil height buttons. Obviously Proffie holder, 2.1 recharge port, 28 mil speaker, and then your NeoPixel adapter or PCB. But it does come in 4 pieces. You have your main chassis, you have a speaker ring, which really the purpose is to act as a spacer between your pommel cap and the chassis. It's just to keep the, you know, whatever that is, 1/4 inch from moving, right, once you have the chassis in. So that fills the space. I modified it just to add a little grab bar. So just in case you need to use it to pull out the chassis or even to align the chassis, right? Because these switches have to line up under the plungers. The plungers are the 3rd piece to the chassis, which I also had to modify for this. But so once you put it in, you might need to orient the chassis under those buttons. So I added that bar across the ring. And then the last piece is just the PCB holder, which I also modified. I think the original design called for it being glued to the end of the chassis. I shortened it so that it fits inside of the chassis. It's not glued in, it's pressed fit in to make access to the battery easier. You never know when you're going to have to do battery maintenance. You might have to replace the battery. So at least this ring is not permanent. We should be able to grab it out, allowing access to remove the battery or whatever else, other maintenance you might need to do. And it's fully functional, you know, out of the hilt. Well, I shouldn't say fully. NeoPixel, obviously not. But we have our kill key. And right, so the chassis for the most part is fully functional, with the exception of LED, or not LED, NeoPixel. Okay, so putting the chassis back into the hilt, you know, get your orientation lined up. There's a couple of things, right, you can use. We can, right, so the hilt we want to have, I'm going to move this out of the way. We want the hilt so the control box is upright, facing up. Same thing with the chassis, buttons up, Proffie up. And, you know, get yourself started, let it slide in. And now you can use the grab bar, right? We can use the grab bar to orient. We can orient it with the grip. We can orient it with the control box, right? Test it, make sure that it's in right.
CNC.
Okay, so we know it's in right. So I hold it with one finger just to make sure it doesn't move, while I use my other hand. Hopefully this is staying on video. Just to grab the cover tech, tighten that. And again, it's just enough to put a little bit of pressure on the chassis to keep it in position. Then we can put this on. Okay, so now that chassis is not going to move. You put a blade or a blade plug up here, just tighten down the retention. The chassis itself is locked in, right? And depending on how tight or the screw, how much has been sanded, will determine how much of a grab it gets on the chassis. So the chassis might still be a little loose and could rotate, right? It won't, the chassis now, because of the way it's designed and we have the spacer, the chassis won't move forward or back, but it could turn, especially maybe as you tighten the pommel cap. That might have a tendency to turn, which is why I'm using the cover tech wheel, just to give it a little bit of pressure, so hopefully it won't turn. But then once you get the blade in, lock it down, put the retention screw in, that chassis is not going anywhere. Or same thing with the blade plug if you're not using a blade. So let's talk about the control box design. This is my personal hilt. You know, so I for purposes of demonstration, what I did was I took the 5mm LEDs, diffused LEDs, kind of matches if you looked at a master replica, Anakin Attack of the Clone Hilt. You'll see they did a similar setup with the LEDs. So the outside ones will be glued using hot glue, because in the AS2 setup, the control box is held down by 2 screws. So I didn't want to do anything permanent, but I also wanted to make sure that these LED caps, essentially what they are, just caps, are sitting on top of the screws. And in the event you ever needed to get this control box off, you'll have to pry these off, but at least it's just the hot glue, right? So maybe if you warm this up just a little bit with some heat, these should be able to be pried out with maybe needle nose pliers that has shrink wrap or some protective coating on them. So that's the outside ones. The inside ones, they're actually put in from the bottom, glued to just a small little ring, essentially a 3D printed ring. So these don't move, and these don't move. So they're secured in place and they won't fall out. And then lastly, the 2 buttons that have the plunger mechanisms. Again, those are LEDs that I drilled right from the underside of the LED, essentially, you know, drilling out the LED itself. And then the plunger that comes with the Goth chassis, I modified so that the top of the plunger is glued to, or is glued inside of the bottom of the LED. And then, you know, a spring, you know, which I just pick up at a hardware store. There's a spring mechanism which maintains retention, right, so that the plunger just doesn't fall down. So it adds retention and allows the LED in the plunger to pop back up, and then actuates so that when you do press it, it's pressing those buttons, those switches that are attached to the chassis. The grips I applied with just some double-sided sticky tape. These are the grips that come with the AS2. My AS2 did actually come with double-sided tape, which I didn't use. I went with my own double-sided tape. They adhered pretty well. I did not use a grip guide. The AS2 does have 2 holes, similar to the Graflex, which had holes for alignment. I'd be honest with you, I kind of like these grips. They are rubber, so we'll see over time how well they hold up. And And the tape itself, it is holding. But, you know, that's a nice grip right there. Nice and secure. It's not it's not heavy at all. What definitely, I think this is my second favorite hilt design. I like Obi-Wan's from Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. It's probably my favorite hilt. And then this would probably be my second favorite hilt. You know, now that we've solved this issue, I'll be taking commissions on these. If anybody's out there that has an AS2 and wasn't sure what to do with it, send it my way. I'll install it for you. All right, guys, any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. Otherwise, thanks for watching.